Welcome everyone. It is my great pleasure to be here once again at our Nyingma summer seminar and to be hosted here at the Sangdupari Temple of Wisdom and Compassion and to serve at the pleasure of the Mangala Shri Bhuti lineage. And here we are in the first weekend of the Nyingma Summer Seminar, which is the section on Hinayana of the three yanas. And certainly there is a lot to cover and a lot that we could speak about. And going off some of Rinpoche's teachings from last night, Elizabeth and I, we often wonder, what we can add to his teachings. And not to say that we are filling in the gaps per se, but that there is so much to cover and so much which could be expressed that it's hard to fit it all into a single weekend or to even divide up all the important subjects that are so integral to understanding these yanas, to understanding these foundations of Buddhism, to understanding these essential points, and then to express that all in a weekend program. It's very difficult. And so I hope we are able to cover everything that is essential to understanding, having a general understanding of Hinayana and the first turning of the wheel of Dharma as taught by Buddha Shakyamuni. And from my own experience, the more I come back to these teachings, these fundamental teachings on the Four Noble Truths and the Four Measurables and the initial instructions that Buddha Shakyamuni gave to his first disciples, I'm really astonished at how nuanced they can be and how penetrative they can be if we really apply ourselves in that sense. And how often there's something more than just the material which is there. It's something more than just the teachings which exists within these initial instructions from Buddha Shakyamuni, which are expressed in the Theravadan school, or as we are calling them, the Hinayana turning of the wheel of Dharma. And I go over the Four Noble Truths again and again and again, which I feel are incredibly important to understand. But I've also been feeling something recently which is important, and I think Kongtrul Rinpoche expressed that a little bit last night, which is the personal connection to these teachings, and particularly thinking in terms of Dharma. And that has been something I've been grappling with. I'm not quite sure how to express it at this moment, but I think I can share a couple of key points. Because as we enter into the Dharma, as we enter into this vast world of study and practice, this profound lens through which we can really see the world in an authentic way and to penetrate the illusions that we grapple with, the stories that we tell ourselves, the narratives that are told to us, and look for something more authentic, something more direct in our experience with how we relate to the world and how we relate to our own mind, our own life, that has to be structured somehow. And Dharma gives us language to structure the vast experience of life into words. And maybe just to give the most important example, when the Buddha first gave his first teachings on the Four Noble Truths, he was giving them to people who had not attained enlightenment. He was giving them to his old friends and companions who had been on a spiritual journey for a long time, but nevertheless did not have the insight or good merit that he had had to find the middle way. They were still pursuing the more extreme forms of asceticism. And sometimes we approach the Four Noble Truths as something very lofty or quite highbrow in the spiritual sense, but these teachings are really given to people who were starting from more or less the ground up. They had some experience, they had great intellectual prowess, but they were not enlightened. These teachings are all given to beings who are not enlightened. And so we must think of these teachings in connection to our own direct experience of life as we experience it, not how a Buddha experiences it. And so when the Buddha does talk about suffering and the cause of suffering and the cessation of suffering and the path of cessation, it is really for our benefit. It is an access point for us to start seeing the world in a particular way that will eventually lead us to awakening. So in that sense, it's a very generous set of teachings. Although it might be intimidating, it seems so uncomfortable at times to talk about suffering in the grand scope of existence. Like, what is suffering? What is suffering in the world? How do I experience suffering in my life? Is suffering out there? Is suffering within my own mind? Just pointing out suffering might seem too simple in some ways, but we tend to see suffering as a thing that exists beyond us. We tend to see suffering as something that is inflicted upon us. We don't tend to see suffering as an expression of our own mind. We don't see suffering as something that we fully wrap our head around. It's just this thing that comes and goes and is not uniquely with us. It's not something that we have mastery over. We take ownership of suffering in the sense that, this is my pain, this is my suffering, this is my deal, this is my trial, or something like that, without actually realizing the nuance within that statement, that when we take ownership of suffering, when we take some kind of personalization of suffering, that it is pointing to the cause of suffering. It is pointing to that sense of identity, that sense of self-grasping, which gives rise to suffering. It is the attachment to the sense of self, which is the cause of suffering. It gives rise to the 5 negative emotions: attachment, aggression, stubborn stupidity, jealousy, and pride, through which all suffering is really experienced. Even physical pain is generally secondary to the emotional pain that rises in conjunction or as a reaction to physical pain. So when we engage with the Four Noble Truths, when we engage with how we view suffering in the world, how we view the cause of suffering, that attachment to the sense of self, we don't always take it personally in the correct form. We take it personally in the sense that we make it a part of ourself, or we blame other people for the suffering that was caused to me, or maybe we even blame ourselves for our own suffering, but we don't blame the attachment to the sense of self. We don't really internalize the subtle message which is linked to suffering being totally dependent on attachment to self, being totally linked to ego and ego fixation.